Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is a rather unusual practice in the sense that the speaker also happens to be the chair. But that is partly because I am a member of the ACMCU faculty, and so I suppose that that's okay if I do double duty. My name is Shireen Hunter, and I am a visiting professor here at the Georgetown University. Been visiting for actually quite a long time. I hope to continue a couple of more years at least. Today, we try, as you know, at ACMCU, in addition to issues that are very much in our mandate, dealing with, for example, Muslim communities, relationship between Muslims and Christians, of course, always with the purpose of trying to bring people together and try to find out what are the causes of differences and try to see whether we can come up with things to bridge those differences. But in addition with that, we also have sessions on issues that are of concern to the Muslim world and also that have some impact, particularly on the relation between Muslim countries and the West. And generally, one of our practices has been that when there are forthcoming elections, we try to have meetings and sort of to talk about what are the issues that are going on and what are the likely outcomes. So don't be surprised if you get invitations in future for other upcoming elections. I know that elections are coming in Pakistan and other places, so this is probably just to kick off, so to speak, our election series. Now, today, of course, we are talking about Iran's presidential elections. And the question is that what is going on at the moment? What are the people who are going to be competing to some extent? What are their views? And also, frankly, what are the issues? I mean, some of the issues obviously are very clear, and I will talk about it. But there are also a lot more fundamental things that are going on in Iran that often does not get reflected, partly because in some cases they're esoteric, certainly for foreign observers, but that in the future could have significant implications for the direction that the country might go. The other issue, of course, which is after the rather tumultuous elections of 2009 and what happened after that, is that whether this is also going to be another of such occasion, and that is there going to be another attempt to, either by government to manipulate elections, and if so, whether the opposition, whoever that might be, to kind of challenge it, and again, like it was done in 2009, go to streets. In other words, to say, if you're not allowing us to get our way or get our voice heard through the ballot box, then of course we are going to go to streets, whether there is such a likelihood or not. So that is basically what I'm going to try to talk about today. But more than that, I'd like to say a couple of words just as a background, because most of this thing has really been obscured, why these things are happening in Iran. And generally, including the 2009 elections, was viewed as some sort of a binary through a binary lens. It was viewed like some kind of a battle of good and evil. In other words, you had on the one side the reformists that then they morphed into green, which is different than the reformists, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit. And then on the other side, you had the evil ones, the Khamenei and the ilk, and of course Ahmadinejad as the representative of the group at that time. The question that I want to, the point that I want to raise is that this was not exactly the case. Yes, there was two different visions, and certainly the opposition, that chose this emblem of green for itself, definitely had a much more, shall we say, that at least rhetorically, I have become very skeptical about talk. Nobody can convince me with talk. I have to see what they will do once they are in power. Because everybody is for freedom and justice and all this when they are in opposition, but when they get to power, the story is something else. Nevertheless, having said that, shall we say that they were actually talking the right talk? But we had to wait and see whether they would walk the walk or it's just going to be limited to talk. And of course, the record of the government, which is, I don't have to say anything. We all know the current situation that Iran faces, significant economic problems, the fact that because of these economic problems, the country's progress has become slowed, despite the incredible potential that Iran has in every area. And of course, on the political and other freedoms, again, we all know that the record, shall we put it very, very generously, is less than desirable. And what can I say about the foreign policy? I mean, you all can see Iran. If it wasn't for the kind of foreign policy the government has pursued, the country would not have been subject to now truly crippling sanctions. And, of course, the shadow of war, although somewhat lighter, but has not disappeared. And anybody who thinks, either here or in Tehran, that shadow of war has disappeared, I think that would be, a little bit, shall we say, naive. Having said all of that, I have also to say this, that the struggle that we saw, so to speak, unfolding in 2009 really is something, it reflected a very deep split in Iran prior to the revolution, and reflected this very kind of unlikely coalition of forces that came together against the regime of Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. And that split is the left-right split. Whoever says that left-right split is not important, the reformists, most of them, and definitely the Greens, are the old left. Whether secular left or Islamic left, some of them chose this Islamism, really out of basically opportunism. And I just have finished a book that hopefully will be published. I'm shopping it around. I have to do it, which explains this in more detail. But this is what it is happening. These were the left. And that the fact was that the left initially was powerful. In the decade of 80s, the left basically ran the country. Mr. Mousavi was the prime minister for almost 8 years, and all of the leftists and Behzad Nabavi, a former Tudeh party member, they were all in power. The right also had some role, but it wasn't that much. Now, after Khomeini died, Rafsanjani came to power, and basically he put the left aside. And since then, they had been working on how can we get back to power. I don't want to go on too far because I have to give you time to, ask questions and answer. I can elaborate maybe during our discussions. But the fact of the matter is that they had prepared for this. And, of course, I think that the regime never realized the right. Whether the right has divisions within itself, as does the left. But the fact is that the essential thing is right. Right is essentially made up of the clergy, most of the clergy. There are some leftist clergy as well. The bazaar, the basically rich merchants and so on. And these were the people that also were the part of the anti-Shah coalition. And now this stuff has become very open. In the websites and so on, different people are writing. Basically, they are just divulging secrets and so on. So the point I'm trying to make is that there had always been two different visions of what an Islamic Republic should be like. For the left, Islamic Republic essentially would have been a socialist republic with some kind of an Islamic veneer. For the left, for the right, Islamic Republic would have been an Islamic Republic in a sense that the Sharia would rule supreme, and they did get some of the left's rhetoric. Unfortunately, most of that rhetoric was regarding foreign policy. One of the things that we keep forgetting, that all this struggle against imperialism and so on and so forth, it was not the rightist clerics that came up with this. They didn't even know what imperialism is. This was the left's discourse, which became then, they kind of appropriated to themselves and have been using. So this is something that we have to see if we're not to get overexcited about green or red or whatever. We have to really get into what it is. So what we saw, basically, the left won in 1997. With Khatami. And they had power for 8 years. The left was very divided. I think one of the reasons the left failed was that the extreme wing of the left, basically, instead of focusing on getting, small concessions from the government, whether it's on press freedom, whether it's on social freedoms and so on, started talking the language of that. In that regard, I think the regime is right. Basically, what they wanted was the soft dismantling of the Velayat-e-Faqih and the Islamic system. Now, as far as my personal view is concerned, I would not shed any tears if that were to happen. But I mean, if you are a political group and you are trying to, advance your agenda, you also have to realize that the other side is going to react to that. And so what happened was that because this reformist, the extreme reformist, which basically drowned Khatami's voice, essentially then put the back of the conservatives up. And so when the election of 2005 came, they were bound and determined that they're not going to let any reformists to win. And the reformists at the time felt that this is our last stand. This is where we have to go. They had in the past tried to, with the student demonstrations and other things, to try to force the regime to make concessions. That had failed. Now, this time they went broke. They went broke, they went to streets, they did what they could, and the regime also went broke. And so they were not going to be intimidated by international opinion. They haven't been at all. But they brought their own forces out in the streets. And of course, as you know, they put everybody in jail, and which is, of course, not a very it's not one of the most glorious pages of their history. But that is what it was. This was a conflict between these two factions that had been going on even pre-revolution, and certainly after the revolution. Succeeded. This happens all the time. Coalitions fractures after victory. This is just something that you can say. This is one of the major principles. Coalitions fracture after victory, no matter where that is. So what happened after Ahmadinejad came to power? Well, the first term of Ahmadinejad, we saw that I think some of you have heard, which was, as far as foreign policy is, he basically resurrected what it was called the revolutionary discourse. And as far as foreign policy is concerned, I don't have to go very far. His infamous speech about the Holocaust and so on and so forth, which basically his foreign policy was still born after that. I mean, no self-respecting person could talk to him, no matter what your views might be on this stuff or so on. But I mean, this was, it's there is an anecdote and say that Talleyrand said something that, I don't know, Napoleon or somebody had done wrong, and then Napoleon said to him that, but this is not a crime, ce n'est pas un crime. He says that, Sire, c'est pire qu'un crime. C'est une faute. It's worse than a crime. It's a mistake. So, I mean, even if we put the moral considerations and all these things aside, for a politician to make such an incredible mistake is, you know, it just. So that, of course, went that thing. So by and large, the first term of Ahmadinejad was fairly quiet. But the second term was that difficulties start, and here I will come to what are the issues currently being debated and what is the lineup right now, people who are going to run. One of the things that happened is that basically the discourse after the 2009 elections changed from that of conservative versus reformist, or as they call it right now, you know, they are the same. The principalists are the old right with all the divisions. Reformists are the, you know, the old left with all the divisions, and the others are just few differences are you know, derived from them. Now, but discourse changed. Discourse became no longer a question of between left and right, different opinions, I mean, you know, but basically the way the government, the Ayatollah Khamenei and the establishment defined it, it became one between revolution and what they call counter-revolution. So that revolution means reliance on Velayat Faqih, which means the supreme position of Ayatollah Khamenei, and basically that his ruling trumps everything else, including the constitution. But the fact is that what the reformists were wrong on, and frankly, they have themselves to blame for, because they were the ones that in 1979 were pushing for the Velayat Faqih. Because the fact is the Constitution sides with Khamenei. This is what it is. None of these people who jumped on the bandwagon of Khomeini read Khomeiни's writings. Khomeini was very clear. His notion of republic was a very limited thing. He never said that the people's will is the basis of power or legitimacy. He said God. God is the legislator. God is where sovereignty is located. And so all those left that went in there, of course, they thought that, well, we get rid of the Shah first by using Khomeini and religion, and then we see what happens. Little they knew that the clergy outsmarted them, because if you are acting within an Islamic context, the clergy have the upper hand. No matter how brilliant you are, if you are a non-cleric, your reading of Islam is just not have the same value as that of a clergy. I mean, it's like if I started talking about, for example, medical issues, I mean, most of you will walk out of this because that is not where my limited knowledge and talent is focused on. So I think that some of it is their own fault. But having said that, so the issue has become revolution, counter-revolution. This is something. And but the other things that has emerged is that the red lines for basically the red lines for dissent. The red line for dissent essentially is Ayatollah Khamenei and the institution of Velayat Faqih. The reason for that is that without the institution of Velayat Faqih, the Islamic government in Iran, at best, will become something like Pakistan. You know, yes, at best, it will have the name maybe, and that even is a dispute, which I will come to that. Probably even the word Islamic will disappear from Iran. What will replace it, I don't know. But that is basically, you know, what has happened. So Ahmadinejad basically rode the tide of, support for the institution of Velayat Faqih. One of the words that emerged after 2009 elections was that something called Velayat Paziri, those who are willing to accept the institution of Velayat and submit to Velayat. So initially, he was the ideal Velayat Pazir. He would follow whatever Ayatollah Khamenei's desires or wishes were. However, as I knew it will happen, because this is in the nature of the beast, it has nothing to do with, is that once he became president, once he saw the powers of presidency and so on, but once also he became fairly popular, and I will go into that a little bit, not too much, because of certain policies that he pursued, he began to say that, well, I am representative of the people. Why should I submit to Khamenei? You see what I mean? So this started again the kind of tension that has existed always. This existed with Rafsanjani, it existed certainly under Khatami, and eventually came to exist also under Ahmadinejad, which means that, as the famous Iranian poet Saadi has said, he says that 10 darwish, men that are not very egotistical and so on, can sleep in a small prayer rug, but 2 kings cannot rule a kingdom. Which is true. So what you have is that you have this double-headed government. On the one hand, you have a president with all the accoutrements of popular sort of voting and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, you have Velayat Faqih, who has God on his side. And so as long as God is still, a fair number of Iranians put God ahead of president, so that, he has some leeway of pressuring. So this part of the problems between Ahmadinejad and Khamenei derived from this, that this was just the tug of power between these two. He wanted to control the government, and Khamenei basically wants, as somebody put it, wants a chef de cabinet, a chief of staff. He doesn't want a president. He wants a chief of staff that will, very expertly and properly will basically implement his wishes and run the country. So this was to be honest. So this is basically one of the problems when you try to put in one place 2 essentially irreconcilable notions. And frankly, I am going to say this: you cannot have religion and republic go together. These are 2 different things. Because one is based on human-centeredness, and the other one, any religion, if you want it, is God-centered. God's words transcends the people thing. If we see in the West we have secular thing, it's because religion has retreated. It doesn't want to fight it with the secular government. In other places in Middle East, for example, you see what's going on in Egypt, in Tunisia, and so on and so forth. The battle is still raging. But the most important thing, the other thing, however, that has emerged, and I think that Ahmadinejad has seen this, and most importantly, people around Ahmadinejad, and that is that the Islamist discourse has run its course, that it no longer can really address problems and issues that Iran is facing. In fact, Mashai, that you see there, he is Ahmadinejad's guru, but also his favorite for presidency, has openly said it. Has openly said, Dori Islamgarayi be payan reside ast. The era of Islamism has ended. So, of course, if the era of Islamism has ended, then what leaves Khamenei? What becomes the basis of Khamenei's thing? He has said that the position of leader is secure, but he will become a kind of honorary figure. He will become like a religious king. In which case, why did you make a revolution? You could have insisted on a constitutional monarchy. It's much easier to make a monarchy into a constitutional monarchy than you turn an ideological state into an ordinary, state. And this is the dilemma of Iran. How do you get out of this, state of ideological state without leading to things that, frankly, does have the possibility of fracturing the country completely? This is, I think, increasingly is in people's mind, and that's why that I think that this is going to affect what people would look for in the elections, although I don't want to exaggerate it too much. So what Mashai has come up with, in the case of Iran, what do you replace Islam with? It has always been the case, unfortunately, in the case of Iran, unlike other Arab countries and, even Turkey, where Islam is the best thing they have had. But in the case of Iran, you had a civilization that at least was equal, if not better than Islam. And so there is always Iran. Iran by Islam. Is it Islam Iranian Islam, which was different, or Iran Islami? And I would submit to you, except for in terms of elite, except for a small group of people, everybody wants an Islami Irani, with its mystical, with its soft, humanistic sort of thing, rather than Salafi Islam or whatever. I have no disrespect, but I mean just. So Mashai has come up with. So since 2010, Cyrus now has become, he started the revival of Cyrus. Because if you don't want, you have to have, and the Iranian culture is present in everybody's life. So Mashai has said, first of all, has a more mystical view, of everything, and secondly, on the whole Iranian nationalism. So this is one of the other things. The main theme, although without saying, attacks on Mashai comes from this, attacks on Iranianism. They keep saying that in election we shouldn't talk about Kurosh and Rostam and all this, Iranian hero or Ferdowsi and so on and so forth. But this is there. This year, for example, there were like several 100,000 people who went and celebrated Nowruz in Pasargad, the tomb of, anyway, I don't want to get into that. We can avoid it. So let me just go back and so forth. So basically what I said here, in this election, and the reason I think Islah Taliban, the reformists, have a little bit now passé, because when they first started, they talked about this reformist Islam. Their discourse essentially was within the context of Islam, Jamhuriya Islami. They wanted to reform Islam because, frankly, outside Islam, they don't have any place. Particularly those elements of the Green movement which are separatists. There is a fair number of that. This is where the Green movement, some people have somewhat of a more, shall we say, nuanced attitude towards them. Ethnic minorities, with what they are suggesting for Iran will be basically, frankly, a recipe at the least civil war, at worst basically partition of Iran. And this is very true. And it is useful to know that both Mousavi and Karoubi were from ethnic minorities. Karoubi wanted the federal government for Iran. Federal government, in case of countries like Iran, is basically dismantling. This is a fact. And this is not something that the Iranians don't know. Okay. So these are some of the fundamental issues that are being talked about. And of everything I'm reading, the question of Iran's disintegration is uppermost in the minds of many. And I think this is going to play a very important role in anybody who wants to create, problems later on. And what are the other issues? Everybody, obviously, these days is concerned about the economy. And that is quite obvious. Iran's economy is not as bad as people think it is, but definitely now with the fall in oil prices, the limitations that they have put on trade and other things, people are hurting. And of course, there has been mismanagement of, I can answer those if you want, because I want to leave enough time for us in questions and answers. Ahmadinejad has done a lot of things in terms of development, particularly in areas that development had not been. Rural areas in terms of building dams and roads and railroads and so on. I am a fair person. I will say it. I don't belong to any group. So that I can say, I don't belong to any group. I will never, ever belong to anybody anyway. The point is that he has done all these things. So he does have a base. Particularly in rural areas, in the small towns, Ahmadinejad has a base, and people are frightened of him. A certain number of middle class is very attracted to Mashai's nationalist discourse. This is like music to their ears. I, frankly, if I were to judge him only on that, I would like him. I would vote for him. But I don't know what kind of person he's going to become in terms of running the country. And in foreign policy, he has said very interesting things. This is one reason they were against him. He said, for example, we don't have any enmity with people of Israel. And so, and in fact, he would, and socially he's very progressive. One of the things they were against him was that they had taken his pictures with singers, and so female singers and so on and so forth. Now, I don't want to paint an idealistic picture of him anyway. He comes from within the system. So obviously there are things, and I don't know his knowledge of whether international affairs or other things, but at least it seems that his instincts is moving, unless he is an absolute hypocrite, and these are all for. So the most important issue, however, are two things that in the election is going to be debated. In addition to who is the revolutionary, who is counter-revolutionary, counter-revolutionaries are not going to be allowed to run. That goes without saying. So because there is this guardian council that will have to determine who is actually qualified to run. So that takes care of that. But within those who are committed to the system, one has to see who goes. The two most important issues right now is economy and foreign relations. And of course, foreign relations and economy are linked. Without improvement in foreign relations, Iran's economy will not be revived, or it will be very, very difficult. And so people are going to look into, and I think leader is looking to see who can actually do this. And so this is very important. So now let me just to show you what the lineup is, and then we can discuss things later. Well, here we have so-called Usul-Garayan. Usul-Garayan basically is the old right. Of course, there are about 15 groups under this title, but I didn't want to give you an overdose of Iranian politics. The important thing to know is that these coalitions that have emerged, which eventually, from among various people that are part of each coalitions, one is going to be chosen. I think the coalition will agree on that. One of this is so-called the majority of principalist coalition, and people who are running there are a lot of them, but one of them is Manager Mottaki, who was a former foreign minister, and Muhammad Hossein Bahouris, and there are many, many others that we don't want to do that. The coalition to watch for, in my opinion, I'm going to make something that no self-respecting academic people will create. That is the so-called 2+1 coalition. The 2+1 coalition is made of Mohammad Baqir Qalibaf, who was a former Sepah and former head of police, and mayor of Tehran, the very much admired mayor of Tehran. And by the way, just to lighten it, used to be known before he became fat, Iran's Tom Cruise. So and this is Ali Akbar Velayati, foreign minister for 8 years under Rafsanjani, and of course also also now is the advisor on foreign affairs to leader, which is even more important. And Haddad Adel, who used to be Speaker of Parliament, is now Member of Parliament. He's really more of a literary man, philosopher, and so on. But his daughter is married to Khamenei's son, so he also has family connections. Now let's come, before going that, Jabheh Paidari essentially is a right-leaning as far as Vilayat is concerned. However, unlike the Usulgarayan, they have, from a social and economic perspective, they are left. So you have religious conservatism with socioeconomic liberalism or leftism. But this supported, this came after Ahmadinejad's victory, but it really doesn't have much traction. Their spiritual leader is Ayatollah Yazdi. They have Saeed al-Jalidi, who is now the negotiator, and this. Anyway, I do not take this very seriously. I don't think they're going to be significant competitors. Now, how about the reformists? Reformists are extremely divided. Extremely divided not only on the question of whom to choose, but whether or not to take part in election at all. Now, however, within the reformists, the moderate reformists, including, for example, the party of the Democratic Party, Hizb Mardom Salari, their candidate has already declared that he's going to run, that he will only refrain from running if all of the reformists reached a consensus and then they advance someone else. They want to have Khatami to run. And failing that, Rafsanjani. But the left wing of the reformists is dead against Rafsanjani. So it's going to be very difficult for them to accept Rafsanjani. And Khatami, I think, frankly, Khatami in general is a very conservative person. He's not very decisive, although he's a very good man and all that. But Khatami doesn't want. He wants to be sure that he will win before he runs. Well, I mean, that you never know. I mean, if election is, no, but that's true. Same with Rafsanjani. Rafsanjani tried to say that I am a savior. You know, he talked about the national coalition government, and Rafsanjani is the savior. Please, please come and ask me to run. Well, nobody did go, and in fact, some people said it's time to rotation and so on. So we still don't know who the reformers are going to come up with. It would be nice if they came up with a candidate that could be, you know. Now we come to Jabheh Dolat, which is the government thing, and that is Mashai. I'm going to come back to Mashai when I talk a little bit about the independent candidate. Mohsen Rezai, he has been running for president so many times. He's not very charismatic. He has said some reasonable things. He has a website, and you can see his views. He's a very moderate Islamist. He would like, and he has a tinge of nationalism in him. But you know, I don't think he has much chance. I mean, he's acceptable, but he just doesn't have what it takes. Now, Rouhani he's a cleric. He used to be the nuclear negotiator. People say he's very close to Rafsanjani, and people have thought that he will be. He comes under basically those reformists that are, you know, very, very moderate. He's the favorite of those who call themselves the party of moderation and development. So, which is, I think that quite now he's going to declare his candidacy on Thursday. He definitely will be accepted by the Guardian Council. Now let me come to Mashai, because this is a very important thing, whether or not, nobody has yet officially declared the candidacy. They just say, there's so many, there are about 20 more candidates, and some of them nobody has heard of. The question of Mashai is very significant thing, and whether Ahmadinejad has a fallback. You see, the most odd against Mashai is this talk about Iran. Talk about Iran, Iranian nationalism, but also excessive talk of the 12th Imam, the Mahdi. And this whole, because if you say that the Mahdi is already present and is guiding the operations of the state and so on, then there is really no room for the faqih and the clergy. This basically is a sort of, in a different way, not the reformist Shia Protestantism, but is sort of a more mystical, if there can be such a thing, mystical Protestantism, which then eliminates basically the clergy. You don't need that. So the combination of these two is very strong, because it both taps into Iran's nationalist feeling, but also its deep Shiism, not the official government Shiism that is now being imposed, but the Shiism that existed, and I think still exists, and once the government changes, actually it will become stronger. This is my belief. The reason we are seeing people moving away from that is because it's been forced on them, you see. So the question of Mashai becomes this. The mix of ideology he is offering is even more dangerous than the ones that the reformists were promoting as far as the regime is concerned. And so the leader doesn't like him. The leader doesn't like him. In fact, the leader vetoed when Ahmadinejad wanted to make him deputy president, or vice president, actually, vice president. And so the question becomes, if somebody who couldn't become deputy vice president, how can he become president? So the question is that is now the most controversial issue in Iran now is whether Mashai would be declared unfit to run by the Islamic Guardian Council or not. And the other thing is that will then Ahmadinejad try to show his muscle and create a situation where that the leader will be forced to allow him to run. And if then, particularly if then the reformists don't have a viable candidate, the likelihood that Mashai can win is very, very strong in a very, sort of unfettered election. So this is the conundrum. So in my humble opinion, and I may be proven wrong, of course, if there is upheaval, it will be before the elections, not after. Now, I will say one word about the dream team of the leader. The dream team of the leader, I think it is a combination of Velayati, Ghalibaf. Haddad Adel, is there. Ghalibaf will be the first vice president. Essentially, he will be the manager of the system, particularly after running Tehran, which is 12, 14 million population is not a mean thing to do. He will be the managing sort of arm of it. Velayati will be the foreign affairs and representing, and he has a lot of experience with that. He was educated in the US. He went to Johns Hopkins Medical School and all that. And then they also said that now another new thing is that everybody said that they are going to introduce their team. Actually, when the candidacy becomes set, they are going to introduce their team so that the people will know who they are working with. So my own feeling is that if the leader gets his way, actually Ghalibaf and the Velayati would be. And under the current conditions, frankly, in Iran, I think that if one is thinking about stability in Iran, and that's mostly Iranian things, and the possibility of both some kind of movement on Iran's foreign relations and efforts to resolve some of the outstanding problems, I think that this is probably the best outcome. But, not always the best comes to pass, and there's a lot of unpredictable things that will happen. But the one thing is also very clear, that Iranians are somewhat tired of extremism of either left or right. this really does come across, except for those who are committed. Those are different things. And most of them are abroad, actually, the ones that, or in jail. In all fairness, one has to say either there or in jail. But I think that their discourse has, run its course. In fact, Islamic thing has run its course. The notion of liberalism is also, in itself, is a hollow thing. Because, liberalism to reach what? Just to have free elections. But what about free elections is not solve Iran's security issues. It's not going to resolve Iran's economic problems. It's not going to resolve. And if it is just a free-for-all, then obviously it could lead to utter chaos. And that is one thing that they don't, most Iranians, I would say, don't want. There are some who would like, but, most of them don't like. So the big question mark, I think, is Ahmadinejad and Mashai and how they are going to do that. Sorry I went on a bit longer than probably generally people do, but it was a lot to cover. So I think now I just open floor for questions, answers, comments.